and thank you to all of you for tuning in. And thank you especially to EY for putting on this fabulous conference. It's one we look forward to every single year. So the topic and the theme for today is all about scaling, and it couldn't be a better or more timely topic for us all to talk about. This is something that's really happening and it's very exciting in the RPA market now. But I want to do something quite different today, because we've all heard many conversations, presentations which amount to, here's a customer, here's what they did, here's a few interesting things along the way, here's how they set up the COE model, and here's some governance advice for how you can do the same. I kind of want to step beyond that and almost ask the question, well, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Where do we want to end up? And how can we maximize the outcomes that we get from the journey, so that maybe you as part of your project will be the one who's done something new on a different level, something amazing, and next year you'll be coming back and telling that sort of glory story. And I've got some ideas and strategy pieces around how you can bring these thought processes to maximize the outcome of your programs. So, like I said, it's a very timely topic. This is an extract, a quotation from our chairman that was extracted from an investor presentation deck. And this really shows that scaling is happening. The benchmark in this slide is a 50 million euro project, which was achieved in a single year in a project that was easily self-funding. And this is just year one. The benefits will continue to accrue over many years. So this is happening now, and there ought to be some kind of industry benchmark or a stake in the ground that helps us talk about different levels of scale and achievement. But with that said, we've got to be careful. We don't want to be on a road to nowhere. Why are we even trying to scale something? To use a simple example, we might create the most efficient loans division in a bank in the history of the world, only to find out that the bank has a different strategy and the loans business is failing, or they want to do something different in the market. So where is this road going to take us? How will we know when we've got to the end of the road? And then maybe, well, what comes next? I really liked Boris's graph, actually, which showed the diminishing returns of a classic RPA program, which is predicated on just give me some processes so that I can automate them. We're always really hungry to go and find stuff to automate, but let's just stop and talk about why we're doing it. So sometimes it's hard just to see what's right in front of your face. The wood for the trees is the expression we would use in English. And very often people talk about meaningless metrics. Let's break them down. Simplistic metrics to talk about scale, such as how many servers have I got? How many users have I got? How many divisions am I in? How many networks am I on? How many desktops have I automated? It doesn't tell us a lot in terms of business outcome, which is really what we want to achieve. And again, we can get numbers with numbers of processes, numbers of digital workers, and so on, numbers of transactions. It does start to get a bit more meaningful when we talk about costs avoided or full-time equivalents that have been automated. But there'll be many experienced people in the audience who know that, well, cost is only 50% of an equation, and what we're really looking for is true business value. So it becomes more and more important to understand the KPIs and metrics you're aiming for. I won't lecture you on that, but the ultimate test is whether we're sort of hitting outcomes that become noteworthy within an annual report for a business, something that a shareholder or a senior manager would care about. So how do we get to that position? Well, I'm going to give you a 3-tier model to think about the scale and the impact and the value. So level 1 is something that we'd all recognize. We're at the bottom rung of a pyramid here to sort of talk about scaling the financial impacts that we spoke about before. So this is help me save some full-time equivalents, help me take some cost out, help me to automate more and more processes. And this has value, and almost every organization starts at this point. So another benchmark would be 50 million over 3 years. This is something that was actually published over 3 years ago by Forrester as a fully audited case study. And the net present value of that saving at the time was 34 million. And I'm going to give you a quick pitfall, something to look out for on each step of the journey. And one of them, Boris also thoughtfully alluded to this, is, well, watch out for how your costs are scaling as well as your benefits, because very easily you can find yourself underwater on that. And so this graph, again from Forrester, shows how a good choice of technology platform means your costs aren't going to rise or explode, rather, in proportion to your benefits. So moving on, to repeat what I said, what most organizations then turn to, they begin to pivot. Once they've taken enough cost out and they've automated enough things, very often actually I find, especially when you approach what we might term the 33% club, those who have that sort of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 mix of people, systems, and digital workers, they start to look at ways of putting costs back into what they do, because their objective has changed. They're looking for some other quality or experience or value driver. It might be adding a new product or service that they never sold before. Or the example from 2020 is with COVID, where actually business continuity has taken on a new meaning for people, and they're very willing to put costs back in to automate something, even it wouldn't otherwise have been economically viable. Now, again, a quick pitfall. Very often in this phase of people's journey, they look to complementary technologies, to things like AI and other things, to kind of supplement those value and quality drivers that I spoke about. But the pitfall here is people very often start with the technology and say, well, what can it do? Let's play with this. Let's do something over here. And they sort of land wherever they land based on just what's practical and what's feasible. So my advice would be, always work backwards. What's the quality and value driver that you're trying to achieve? Let's go and select the technology or combinations of technologies that would help you to achieve that. But that's not the topic for today. So this third level doesn't just go up a layer on the pyramid. We're actually changing direction and looking among a new dimension. And this is the key theme for me today. So we're talking about scaling the business dimensionally. We're doing something brand new that wasn't done before, that genuinely adds value to the strategy of the business over a 5 to 10 year horizon. So like I said, maybe this is entering a new market where the business wasn't operating or competing. Or maybe it's taking a long, hard look at who the business and the organization is and saying, well, do we want to be another Me Too competitor where we're just competing on price and we're in a crowded market? Or do we want to differentiate our brand? Maybe our thing is that we offer the best service in the whole market, and we've got the greatest range of products as well. Something that completely sets you apart, that's going to take many years to build, but RPA can sort of help you on that journey. And you're going to hear later, there's a panel discussion on Telefonica, so I won't discuss it now, but here's a flavor of what you might achieve. And I'm going to talk about the technology strategy behind that. And the key advice here, if you see that maze, I'm going to dedicate a slide to that in a second, is again, like with layer 2, start with the outcome you're trying to achieve and work backwards. So I'm going to introduce a term now, which is outside-in design for your organization. But whichever step you're at, the Blue Prism robotic operating model is going to help you at each step and think about how you advance from stage to stage. So let me repeat that term now. I'm going to contrast outside-in design approaches versus inside-out design approaches. Now, I don't know if, like me, when you were a child, you enjoyed puzzles and mazes, but I would always find as I worked my way through a maze, it was actually a lot easier to start at the end and work backwards. And that's a useful metaphor for what we're going to discuss now. So outside-in and inside-out design. Well, what happens in a lot of programs is people begin to undertake transformation and they say, well, what systems have we got? We've got some horrible mainframes, we've got legacy systems everywhere, we've got fragmented data. What can we do? And they come up with workshops for ideas. They look at process improvements, they weave in some automation, and they get to a result where, rightly, they congratulate themselves on the things that they've achieved. But sometimes, I like to question those programs, because if you were to put yourself in the shoes of the customer, you might reasonably ask, well, what can we observe that's different? Because half the time, all you're doing is taking cost out of the organization, and there might be marginal quality improvements for the customer. And these things have limited runway. They're only going to take you so far. And as has been observed today, it gets harder and harder to iterate that and do it again and again. So that's what happens when you start with the systems on the inside, and then you work your way outwards. So let's turn that round now. We're going to talk about outside in design, where we start on the outside and work our way backwards to the systems. So set to one side for a second. You've got those legacy mainframes and all the other stuff. That's not going to change very soon. Let's just leave that to one side and now daydream. This is your opportunity to daydream. How might the business be different in 5 to 10 years based on the strategy of the organization? Now let's place ourselves in the shoes of the customer. And what experience are they going to have with this wonderful organization that we create that offers best-in-class service, different products that aren't available elsewhere? What's the experience? Let's break it down to the point where if they're using a mobile app or whatever it might be, they press one button and then this happens, and then they get a text message 10 minutes later, something else happens, their account is set up. Let's design those experiences. And then the concept here is inside out. So we work backwards from whatever that experience may be to then say, how can we map it back onto the systems that we have? Now, in the past, we've automatically written those approaches off because, well, it's really hard and you can't layer a mobile app on top of our mainframe and it would never work and blah, 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 blah. Well, there's a new opportunity and a new way of working, which I won't discuss in detail now, but it is predicated on a microservices strategy. And that's what I'm going to expand on as we make our way through. So a quick example, again, I'm not going to spoil the story or the detail that you have in the later panel discussion, but at Telefonica, for example, what happens is a customer calls in, they connect to an agent, and that agent has a brand new user interface, and this sits on top of all their other pre-existing systems. They had 20 to 30 different systems that they used to have to interact with. There's now a digital workforce sitting in between that's just abstracting away all of that noise, all of that complexity. Some of the processes that used to maybe take 9 minutes, there'd be 80 different clicks across 30 different screens on 7 different systems, and might just be reduced now to a simple form on a button submission. Now, what's powerful about that is that we've taken all these big monolithic systems, which were very inflexible, and we've broken them apart into tiny little pieces and functions which can be woven together in new ways. So one of the really amazing things about that project, where EY, as it happens, were the consultants working on it, was there was all this innovation and conversation coming from Blue Prism as a vendor, from EY as the service provider, and from the customer themselves, really getting involved and co-creating some of that innovation about where do they want to take it. And this was based on the flexibility and the speed that they had to be able to take the project forward. Because things were broken down, they were simple. So this is where microservices come in. This might be a new term to you. It's been around for over a decade at least. And it's a kind of a thought process for if you were to set up a brand new organization with a blank sheet of paper today, you were to design your technology strategy from scratch, yes, microservices would be wonderful. It would give you all sorts of freedom and flexibility to innovate and change things easily without having all the big risk and complexity of big programs. But for real organizations in the real world, they have big inflexible systems already, and they find this really hard. But the beautiful thing is about this approach is that RPA sits as a layer on top and then begins to open up and expose the parts of the system into very small flexible pieces. So here's how it works. Like I say, you've broken it up and you've made one small function available. Let's just say it's an address change. Now that's really easy to consume through a robot or through a new user interface or through a web service call, through a third-party system. Maybe you want to connect it to a consumer app, for example. It doesn't matter now because it's just a service. Nobody actually knows what system is sitting behind it. And so because it's so simple and ready and easy to consume, we've all seen in RPA programs, they can go really quickly because the cognitive load on the developer is quite low. They just know there's a service that allows them to change addresses and they don't have to worry about the detail. So what quickly happens is people have a few of these different things and they begin to weave them together and innovate at the process level and put new things together. And this fosters a great sense of innovation. Some wonderful things can happen very quickly. And this promotes scale. Every time you automate a process, you're making more and more services available, which then leads to more and more innovation. And you get this snowball effect going as it goes faster, faster, and faster. And so what this means ultimately is then, as you look to introduce new technologies, maybe you've got some machine learning algorithms or a new chatbot or whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. When you adopt a new technology, it only really becomes meaningful when you weave it into the fabric of the organization, when it's connected to your existing way of doing business. And because you have these microservices ready to go, very quick and easy to plug and play, there's very minimal testing involved. If things don't work, you can switch them around. You get this great rapidity, which means you've got very short time to value and very low cost of innovation. And the result of those two things is to turbocharge the level of innovation you have and the openness to new technology in your organization. And then finally, as we look at that ease of change and rapidity, it fosters a low total cost of ownership because your maintenance is so easy to keep on top of. And more than that, you get this sense of adaptability. So again, I won't spoil the story, but look forward to the Telefonica panel session later. They'll tell the story of having done all of this in 2019 and laid the foundation and put this new way of working in place. When COVID came along, it was a very easy switch for them to just say, well, okay, we have to work from home now. They had the resilience in the organization and the agility to do that. So as you now start to think, well, what does this mean to me? Where do I take my organization? Your 5 to 10 year thought process and your strategy is up to you, but all of these here on screen would be readily viable and sensible examples. So I'm going to leave you some final thoughts now. I would encourage you to do that daydreaming. Go and think, where do we want to be as an organization and how might we be different? And here are some examples. Well, maybe you'd be much more digitally adept. Like I said, to be able to poise, just to take advantage of those opportunities that come your way. Maybe you'd be loved by your customers. You know, so often we're just, maybe we're liked sometimes. Maybe customers sometimes just patronize our service. They just use it, but they're largely indifferent. Maybe you'd be so unique in the market. You'd have done something so special that you'd be loved by your customers, not just for what you do, but actually who you are. As I've said, you can very easily and quickly become much more resilient with this approach. You'll be much more efficient. You'd have such a low cost to serve model that you'd have this flexibility to trade off shareholder value, customer value, or sometimes those go together. In the call center, if you take time out of a call without hurrying the customer, that delivers value to the customer and it delivers value to the organization. And maybe, just maybe, you know, if you work that hard enough on your brand, the experience you're trying to make using an outside-in design approach, working backwards from the solution through the problem to where you are today, maybe you'd be inimitable and that would generate unique value for you. So wherever you are on this sort of three-stage pyramid of value, it doesn't matter where you are. The question I'd like you to take away today is think through that experience. What experience do you want to create for your customers? And so on that note, I'll close. Thanks for listening.